your district this week to be here with us in sunny San Diego for the National Conference on Education. And specific to this fine hour, thank you for joining us for part 2 of our AI in Schools conversation, part of the broader policy strand here at NCE. Bridging policy, innovation practice. Yesterday, we really had more of a 30,000-foot framing conversation about AI and education. And we're drilling down just a little bit to a more local level here to talk about some of the implementation and policy, a little bit more granular, closer to the day-to-day interactions that you are having in your communities, in your schools, and in your district. I'm really privileged to be joined by this esteemed set of panelists to talk through an absolutely scripted panel. When you have friends that you're asking to take time away, you do not hit them with hard-hitting questions that they haven't had time to prepare for. But at the same time, the panel conversations in NCE are for you. So we'll go through about half of them, and then we'll open it up to see if there's any questions. And if not, we'll go back to this planned content and checking in further on. But again, this is a conversation for your purposes. I have the distinct privilege of introducing, in the order, I'm going to go down. This is Richard Culatta, who's the Executive Director of ISTE. To his immediate right is Reid, Senior Legislative Director with the National Conference for State Legislatures. To his right is current Superintendent Dr. Thomas Taylor of Stafford County Public Schools in Virginia. To his right is Erin Mote, who is the co-founder and Executive Director of Innovate EDU. And on the far end is Andrew Coe, founder of Kovexa, and also helping us at AASA, serving as our Chief Innovation Officer. So we're going to jump right in with a framing conversation. We'll start with you, Andrew, and come back this way. Can you tell me about the top priority of your organization or your current role as it relates to schools and implementing AI in this moment?
Sure. Thank you very much. And for those, I think, who did not attend the last panel yesterday, my name is Andrew Coe. I did co-found Kovexa as an education advisor and consultant. Prior to that, 25 years in the tech industry, running Amazon Web Services education business globally, Samsung as well as Microsoft. And our offering overall is to not only help accelerate the AI adoption by having architects from the Google and Amazon to help create pilots and really experiment, but also have a professional learning background that we also have driving a lot of AI literacy, but also innovation. AI is here today, but tomorrow there'll be other technologies, and we want to prepare the districts to become more agile and innovative. So that's what we do.
I'm doing that. That thing is heavy. How y'all doing this afternoon? Thanks for coming to a 2 o'clock panel and choosing us over a coffee on the bay. So I appreciate that. I'm Erin Mote. I'm the Executive Director of Innovate EDU. I call us the Procter & Gamble of education because we are a house of brands, not a branded house. And so we run a number of multi-stakeholder alliances in K-12 education. Some of you might have heard of Project Unicorn, which focuses on data interoperability, the National Partnership for Student Success, the Pathways Alliance, and the one I'm going to talk about today, which is the EdSafe AI Alliance. And so I'm going to use that frame in the work today. Our biggest priority right now at the EdSafe AI Alliance is to build capacity and knowledge in the field. And we're doing that in a couple ways. First, at EdSafe, we have been the proponent since 2020 of the SAFE framework. And maybe you've heard of the SAFE framework because it's also the name of Senator Schumer's framework in the AI caucus. That's not a coincidence. It's safety, accountability, fairness and transparency, and efficacy of AI tools in education. It's also the framework the Australians have used to create their generative AI policy process, as well as now the European Commission. And so why is that so important? Is because the global space will influence the federal space, which will influence the state space, which will then influence the district space. And so having a framework that starts with safety, accountability, moves to transparency and fairness, and then to efficacy is really, really important. And the work that we're doing is with 12 districts across the country in policy labs. So from New York City Public Schools, where we're running their AI policy lab, to El Segundo, California, to Canyon City, Colorado, we're working with 12 districts that we've deliberately chosen for their diversity in their problems of practice, but also in where they're located in the country. So rural communities, urban communities, folks that are in suburban communities who have different types of pressures, different problems of practice. And in this policy lab, using an open science approach, we are developing a policy stack for what it's going to take in a district to implement AI using the SAFE framework. What's most exciting about that work is it's all open science. So from New York City to Gwinnett, which is another one of our policy lab districts, they're going to publish it into the world come June. And so you could use that as starter dough in your own districts to see what they're doing from acceptable use to privacy to a number of other things. And the last thing that we do in terms of building capacity and knowledge, again, our number one priority right now is we lead the EdSafe AI Fellowship, which we have 60 fellows who are working through a 12-month fellowship to build their own capacity, knowledge, and network around AI in education. It's really exciting to join today, and I can't wait to hear your questions.
Hi, I'm Thomas Taylor. I'm the superintendent in Stafford County, Virginia, which is a suburb of DC. If you have seen Quantico on a TV show or in a movie, that's where we are. So lots of Marines and FBI agents chasing Hannibal Lecter. So it makes parent meetings really interesting. What we do in Stafford schools is we teach the children. That's our job. Our top priority right now with AI, we've actually crossed the initial policy boundary. We have an initial policy. We've had one for several months. We have a regulation. Our biggest challenge is actually in the professional learning space. And I would say, to be very specific, our communication with clarity about expectations, roles and responsibilities, guidelines, support, and resources.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Austin Reid. I'm the Federal Affairs Advisor for the National Conference of State Legislatures. We are the nonpartisan and bipartisan organization that represents all of the legislatures in the states and territories. There are many groups that associate themselves with legislatures. Sometimes they even run bills in your state. We are not that group. We are nonpartisan, bipartisan. We are an extension of the legislature and work to strengthen the institution. So as it relates to artificial intelligence, this is a major priority for our organization as well as legislatures. I would actually say that this is probably the second largest priority across the country in terms of legislative inquiry that we're seeing from legislators this year. Now, while this is a really big topic, fortunately, our legislators and members have actually been a little bit, I think, ahead of the game in terms of thinking about smart legislative responses to artificial intelligence. We already had a task force on cybersecurity that has now taken on artificial intelligence as one of its primary charges. And actually, that task force released a primer for legislators and presenting sort of frameworks for how legislators can think about regulating or legislating on artificial intelligence. If you want to look it up, it's called Artificial Intelligence, a Primer. But essentially in that, and I'll just give you a quick preview, because what we're going to do is try to figure out how to apply those frameworks into an education context. That's actually what legislators are really working on right now. There's not a great sense of consensus of what that should look like, at least from the conversations that we've had. But essentially what's emerging is between this push-pull for calls for regulation and then calls for more self-governance to allow innovation to flourish, what's emerging is sort of a middle ground where legislators are thinking about taking a kind of a wait and see approach and trying to address gaps as they emerge. And so what they're looking to do is, rather than trying to legislate, whole cloth, actually look at, trying to have narrow and specific goals for the legislation, either refining existing regulation that already exists, and then trying to create guardrails. So these kinds of ideas are something we'll get into a little bit later, but this is of course something that all legislatures are thinking about across the different policy topics that they cover.
Hi everyone, I'm Richard Culatta. I am the CEO of ISTE and ASCD. If you are not aware, recently these two organizations, ISTE and ASCD, came together to form a single organization. We're really excited about that. We feel like in this post-COVID world that we live in, having a group of sort of tech and innovators and then another group of curriculum and instruction people just doesn't serve kids well. And so we're coming together to really make sure that that's a community that is really helping redesign the future of learning. I'm incredibly honored to be sitting here with this great group of humans. They're doing amazing work. I'm really honored to get to collaborate with them. I'll just say a little bit here quickly about what we do on the ISTE AASCD side around AI. Our focus is completely on the professional learning for teachers. We've seen over and over again, if we get the adults in the system understanding, then everything goes much better for kids. And so that's where we focus. And to be really specific about this, we do it a little differently than some of the other groups that are out there. There are people that are very interested in how AI could be used for teaching a particular subject, teaching math or teaching literacy, and they're showing a whole bunch of tools. And there are some great tools, by the way, and I think AI could be interesting for teaching math and literacy. I'm not dismissing that. Our focus is much more on how do we prepare young people to thrive in the AI world when they graduate. That's a slightly different piece of it, and that's what we spend most of our time on. There's a whole lot we don't know about AI and the future of AI, but one thing I can guarantee is when every one of the students that graduate from your schools graduates, they will be working on teams where not all members of their team are human. We know that. I was just in China last month, and I was talking to somebody, and her boss, she reports to an AI. We have people who have AI reporting to them. I don't know a single tech developer these days that doesn't co-work with AI that they pass code off to. And so how are we preparing young people to thrive in that world? That's what our PD is focused on. And we have a bunch, with some free curriculum that we do. We have a whole bunch of programs that we can talk about more if you want to at some point. But that's our goal, is can we get teachers and leaders up to speed on what it means to live and work in a world where you're jointly working with people that are not human, and when are there uniquely human skills that should never be passed off to AI, and what are those skills, because I think we often don't know, and when are there skills that really are much better served being passed off to AI and not wasting time in school when that could be focused on more important uniquely human skills.
And Richard, you just said you were going to do that by next Friday, right?
Yes, next Friday, Thursday. We'll try to get,
Thursday,
yeah.
okay. So I want to do a little bit of level setting here. So from an AASA perspective, we're here with this panel and this conversation at AASA because we are looking to expand the scope of our Student, Child, and Privacy Center to be more about data security. So a catch-all for our policy and advocacy work on E-rate, cyber, AI, student data, and privacy. But specific to AI, what we want to do is really focus on the policy angle, and not just federal policy, but what are those grab-and-go resources, technical resources, implementation, compliance, template policy, template communications, a little bit of all of that. But you can't do that by yourself. You have to work with people who are either doing this work already. I know that we've partnered a lot historically with another group that's out in front of us with a lot of grab-and-go AI resources already. Keith was in here. COSIN has, we partner with, Keith Kruger's here with COSIN, and COSIN and AASA have a long-standing partnership on a litany of ed tech issues. It's the Empowered Superintendent Series, but we want to work smarter, not harder. So we'll start by pushing that out. But that's our why. And as an offshoot of that, when we partner with Andrew to get some of that funding to push this into reality, we're launching an AI steering committee. If you're interested in being part of that, we're looking to develop that to be an organic two-way street where we'll communicate what we're hearing. I will step out of my single lane of federal advocacy about what we're hearing from the field, but we want to hear from you. Opportunities, obstacles, needs, wants. This didn't work, did you see this? So if you're interested in signing up for that, my email address is there. Just drop it in my inbox, and we'll be following up after reflection on this conference to bring that steering committee into reality so that we can move forward with the work. The second why is I am constantly humbled by panelists like this because they are all leaders, but what I admire about all five of them from the get-go is they are willing to lead from the back. They will lead, they are executive directors, they are founders, they are senior officials, but they will reverse these up and they are doing this work either with practitioners or, like in Austin's case or my case, with the members. And I think that makes it much easier to have the relationships, to get the conversations, to really understand a why that you heard all five of them mention, which is the kids. I was in the gym this morning and someone just had a shirt on that said, because the kids. I was like, that's a good, simple message, right? So for our second question for the panelists, Erin, I actually want to start with you. In your work with Innovate EDU, you're both seeing and in part informing the front edge of AI in schools. What is the biggest opportunity that AI affords schools?
Yeah, I just want to echo something you said as I answer this question, that so I'm an enterprise architect by training. That means I'm a technologist, but that also means I can only think in systems. And I think that there is a moment right now, and I think it's a pivot moment, in education that, and maybe you feel like, oh my God, I've heard that before, personalized learning, methods, blockchain, blah, 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 blah. I could go on, right? But here's what's different. The way we are getting information and the way we will interact with information and the way we will think about knowledge and expertise and learning is going to shift. And that's why we founded the EdSafe AI Alliance and really reconstituted it with partners like AASA and AFT and NEA and the National Council for Learning Disabilities and COSN and ISTE, is because it's gonna take us all rowing together. And this is the thing I think what's really important about that is because it will change the way we communicate, we interact, it's going to shift learning and knowledge and professional practice and maybe even the way we communicate with students and families. But here's what's not gonna shift. Education is fundamentally a human enterprise. No technology is ever gonna replace a great teacher. But here's the thing that I see the best school districts taking on right now. They are thinking about how they allow teachers, paraprofessionals, coaches, the whole educator ecosystem to think about the thing that actually we know moves the needle for kids on chronic absenteeism or youth mental health or a whole host of issues. How do they strengthen the relationship between student and teacher? How do they give the educator, the bus driver, the person in the central office more time to focus on the human relationship? And so in the work that we're doing in El Segundo, which is just sort of right up the five, they're focused on how do we communicate with families? How do we help them build knowledge, not fear? How do we make sure that the gaps that exist within our existing system aren't exacerbated by AI? The reality is AI isn't going to create gaps. The gaps are already here. The highest rate of use and knowledge about AI, white college-educated men. The lowest, women, folks who don't have a college degree, and folks in rural communities. And so AI isn't going to make gaps. The gaps exist, and it's going to make them worse. And so folks who are focused on the equity piece of it, who are thinking about technology as enabler of great human connections, those are the schools and the districts and the leadership, I think, that's gonna have the most success with this type of technology. And you wouldn't now think about ever going to a computer to answer all your emails, right? You wouldn't sit in a computer terminal in your office. This is a shift in technology, much like when we went from computer terminals for email to it being in your pocket. So it's like the internet. I'm serious. I want you to feel that and then think about, okay, how do I be really clear about the guardrails, the guidelines, and the things that would enable educators to use this technology in a way that's safe, accountable, fair, and transparent, and efficacious.
Okay, my next question takes us to an event that was actually held before a conference. We had a pre-con facilitated by Andrew that, for lack of a better word, I've called the AI speed dating event. So, Andrew, any long-term relationships there? No, I kid. On the heels of the speed dating event earlier this week, what would you identify as the biggest threat or misstep of schools? And I'm not saying that it's vicious or malicious, but there are just missteps. As you're coming out of the gate, if you're coming fast, if it's on the heels of just a disruptive technology, what is that misstep, and as it relates to policy and practice for schools in particular?
Thank you. I do want to clarify what the speed dating thing was, because it was on Valentine's Day. So it was intended to be a spoof on Valentine's Day, because a lot of folks, about 70, 80 people, gave up their Valentines to be with us on the Wednesday. And we did a little private sector. We called them Pitch Fest. So we had 13 generative AI companies from around the world. I mean, to Erin's point, Singapore, very advanced. We brought in the one company that was the actual literacy and reading application, generative AI, by the Ministry of Education there. And we have other big companies, Google, Amazon, ones that are still in their garage creating new types of applications that are very diverse when it comes to what functions or use cases they're trying to solve. Everything from social studies, to voice, to actually literacy, or even smart assessments. So that's what that was, and it was intense, 15-minute pitches. And to answer your question, Noelle, I think rather than missteps, I think I was trying to demystify what AI was by actually not showing presentations, but actually having the superintendent, the leaders, members of AASA actually see what is being innovated now, or innovating, being created now, that could be ultimately in your classrooms tomorrow. And so we got big players, small players, and I think there are several common things that we picked up from some of the feedback, and we'll definitely share with everybody here. They recognize that AI is evolving. It's not static. So everyone thinks it's ChatGPT. It's not. That's just the beginning. You heard Microsoft launch Copilot. Google launched Gemini. These are the players who are now taking models and making their own models. And then they're all taking, so you're gonna see a whole connectivity of billions and billions of data sets. And so to other folks in the policy, keeping the guardrails is important, but also really decoupling that high level AI to understand where it goes down. And I think that was the biggest one, so that hopefully gave those individuals who participated there a little understanding that it is chaotic, that's normal, and the iterators or the disruptors of the technology companies are constantly changing, so it's very smart to also have a very common understanding of what AI is. I would ask every individual what AI is and write it down. I 100% guarantee it will not be all the same. And so having that common knowledge when you are in your leadership conversations of how that impacts a learner, an educator, the community is important. And the second thing was sentiment. Everyone's here, we're technologists, we're wanting positive things and close the gap. Sentiment of AI is going negative right now. It's because of all these deep fakes. I mean, I almost got, scammed on something that looked so real on not just a phone call, but even emails that was followed up with a phone call. So they're getting more sophisticated. And so I think understanding that those are also important to really recognize as well. So being responsible is really a core pillar too.
A parallel between what you just outlined for the speed dating event and the part one of this conversation was referencing this as a disruptive technology, which it is. And I think there's two sides to that same coin. It's a disruptive technology, disruptive in a good way. At the same time that it's disruptive, it's similar to all disruptive technologies that you've survived and endured because you've done disruptive technologies. You know how to get this. You've written policies for other disruptive technologies. So I think it's really important to remind people of that. This isn't completely new. But I think what is new is the expediency of it. It was so quick and so fast, and because it's internet-based, much like ChatGPT, the kids can get into it and add it and through it so much faster, not even considering the precautions or safety or mental health or data privacy connections. And so it's thinking through all of that as we have these conversations. Rolling right ahead, we're gonna go to Austin next. I like to ask questions about state legislatures because it makes me feel better about working only with Congress. So, Austin. We know that state legislatures will have a critical role in both crafting and supporting policy in schools, both directly and indirectly. What are the top trends that you're expecting and already seeing for AI policy for schools at the state level?
Yeah, I'll give you a little sense of what we're seeing in the legislative tracking, but I posed this question to a number of state education chairs that I was talking to last week that were representative of just about every corner of the country, and I said, how is AI impacting your committee work this year? And they said, we're paying attention to it, but we're not really doing a whole lot with it right now. And there's a couple reasons for that, and I think this is, by the way, for district leadership, this is probably good news. Essentially, they said that in the legislature, they are working on AI, but there are other issue areas that are taking priority. So a lot of them happen to work in adjacent to workforce issues. They said more than education, the legislature is trying to figure out how AI is impacting workforce, a whole other can of worms. There's a couple other things that sort of impact this. One, some legislatures aren't in. This is also a shortened session for many legislatures. It also tends to be a less productive session going into an election year than the prior year. So there's some just general legislative headwinds. Those are always good to know. But I think there's some reticence because as we're talking about, this is a very fast-moving issue. And legislation is not a fast-moving thing. It's very much like the ships that are out in the harbor. Once you get them going in a straight line, they're good, but if you try to turn them around, it's not very successful, and that's the problem with legislation, is it's very authoritative and durable, but it's not very nimble. And so I think the legislators are really trying to see how this is taking what's going on in the field before they really step in and try to do something. But that being said, we are seeing some bills. Our tracking has pulled about 16 bills from this session across the states, which isn't that much. It's not nothing, but it's not a ton. 15 of them are pending, none have passed, only one has failed. Now, you might imagine that what the legislation tends to touch on, it's actually contra to what our primer actually recommended to legislatures, which said, hey, try not to do task forces. Well, the legislatures have gone out, and about a third of those 15 bills are to create task forces. The one that did fail, I believe, was in Virginia. They tried to create a task force and it failed. I don't know why, but that's where things are at. But there are a few other trends that we're seeing outside of the task forces in education. There's a couple of states, New York and Wisconsin, that have legislation about using AI to help with school security and threat detection. I saw some posters for that around here, so that must be an active area. Maryland is a state that is, I think, taking to heart some of the recommendations from our task force on AI, and in that they are trying to amend their existing privacy regulations. So not doing anything that's brand new, but just trying to amend and update. And then, of course, you've got a couple states like Kentucky and Oklahoma that are trying to create guidance to their state agency, as well as try to facilitate some professional development for teachers. But again, those are sort of broad strokes goals. And then we know that there are about 5 state agencies that have guidance out there for various ways that schools can work with artificial intelligence. So it's sort of active, but not really. And I think that the next session is where you might see a little bit more activity. We'll kind of talk about how you could work with your legislator to help them figure out this issue alongside your learning. But if we do see any sort of thing take priority, it's going to be around this concept of consequential decisions. And this was a term that was defined in California legislation last year that essentially said, to the extent that artificial intelligence or algorithms have a material impact on humans via government services, then that's something that really would be a priority. And so in the education context, they mentioned things like training, assessment, proctoring, academic integrity, accreditation, certification, admissions, financial aids, and scholarships. To the extent that algorithms are impacting those processes and they're having negative consequences, I think that would be an issue that would rise to the top in terms of that legislative scrutiny. But in terms of how these things are being enacted in schools, I think that's something the legislators are still trying to figure out, and I've got some advice for you later on how you can work with your legislator to navigate those waters.
So, Austin, quick unscripted question. Parallels that we see between student data privacy and AI, right? Like really starting at the state level. And as we're negotiating some of these federal policy conversations, really looking at some crosswalks. The states have really led privacy legislation over the last decades. Are you seeing any trends or thoughts about that data governance and protections for the policies that states have put in place around student data privacy as it relates to AI?
I think we're starting to, and we've seen that in some of the tracking. We're seeing this in a lot of different contexts. I think there's been a real question about states, trying to create data systems, trying to create privacy around those, but also sort of trying to interrogate why they have that data in the first place. And I do think that when you look at what the recommendations of our report are, they do establish guardrails, and I think concepts of transparency and ensuring that what you're collecting actually makes sense is something that they've been looking into. But it's a really complicated issue. It's one that, there's quite a bit of interplay between state and federal work there, and it's one that I think, the thing about legislators is they're only in for 2 years, and sometimes they're citizen legislators, and these are really, really complicated issues. So sometimes this flummoxes them, and by the time they start to get that expertise, they're no longer in office. So that's really one of the headwinds here, and why I think these organizations, who are the true experts on AI, are really helpful in the work that our members do.
Okay, Richard, one of the things I've appreciated about your career is the cross-cutting perspectives that you can look at, local, state, federal, national organizations. So with all of those hats on, the question is, what are the common through lines in implementing policy and practice for schools in AI at those levels, local, state, and federal?
Wow, that's
Not too
no. So common through lines. I think one of the biggest things, this may sound like a simple answer, and so if you're expecting some major thing and this is what I say and you go, oh really, that's it, but I think establishing a common understanding and a common language is really, really critical. And we underestimate that, but it gets back to what you're saying. Andrew, I think you made a comment. If I asked you all what AI is, you'd get 80 different answers. We actually did a survey of teachers. In our group, the teachers that work with us tend to skew a little bit nerdy. 80% of them couldn't even define what AI is, right? It was magic, right? It's right. AI isn't magic. That's my bumper sticker. AI is not magic. Magic is mysterious and uncontrollable, and AI is neither of those things. But getting a common language really matters, and understanding that, because then you can have the conversation. Here's an example of that. This is just maybe a sort of a silly example, but I actually think an important one. One of the number one questions, we think about AI and how it can transform learning, has potential to do amazing things, has potential to do actually some scary things if we're not careful, right? The number one question that I still get when I go and visit schools, I visit schools all the time, is how do we stop our students from cheating? Cheating, right. So here's the crazy thing. I just want to be really clear. If you think we have a serious problem with cheating in this country, you are right. We have an enormous problem with cheating. The latest data shows about 70% of high school students in the US cheat, right? That is a big problem. But here's the thing that I want to make sure we understand. This is back to understanding common language. A recent study, this is from Stanford University, and it was a really powerful study, showed that percentage, that 70% of students that cheat, did not change at all from before or after the availability of generative AI tools. Not at all. And so what this means is, if you're worried about cheating, you should be. And we could have another panel where we talk about what to do about cheating. There's actually a whole bunch of things you can do. You can make learning feel more meaningful. You can make the assessments more relevant. There's a bunch of stuff you can do about cheating. But adding or removing access to generative AI will make no impact on your cheating problem. So it's a separate issue, and so that's one of those things where I think if we can understand that, if you want to do something with cheating, again, great. We'll talk to you. We'll happily have a conversation with you about how to reduce cheating in your school. There's lots of ways to do it, but that's not to do with this problem. If people were going to cheat, they're going to do it before or after the tool. And so let's move on to a conversation that's more meaningful when we can be on the same page of what some of the challenges are.
Okay, I have more questions, but this is really your panel. Any questions from the audience that you would like to pose to any of our panelists here? We'll take a couple and then otherwise move forward. Yes, sir.
Noelle, I'd like to hear what a good policy has in it regarding this. What does Thomas Taylor have in his?
Well, let's just start at the bottom with Andrew and go down. That way we have an order.
When it comes to, I guess I'm not the policy expert, but I would say fundamental things is definitely, I'd say, even from a local level, is creating a plan for what that means in your district of how you're going to implement some of those things. I think there's definitely ways to creating the mechanism of data governance. I mean, that's not a policy, it's probably an action. What I look at from a technology perspective is your data well formed and cataloged, and understand where the data resides, because when you do put certain type of data into systems, if there's no policy that tells you not to do that, that's when the data gets kind of out into the ether, into these generative AI tools that are out there that you may not want there. And those policies are one thing, but then you have to make sure that you are making sure that you're achieving the guardrails and make sure that people are adhering to that. So there's audits. What we are seeing is data privacy officers being created. So not just about cybersecurity, but actual governance and an individual or a group of individuals to make sure that that is becoming something that's incredibly threaded throughout. I would say those are just some of the basic ones. I know there's probably more in depth, but those are the ones that I've seen much more, we'll call it, bubble up to the top.
So I think there are many of you who already have acceptable use policies or privacy policies or do no harm policies. And so again, those are the three big pieces of the S in SAFE. Those are the three tenets. And so we have people actually start with safety, because it is the fear that people have, is where's my data gonna go? And so if you sort of start with safety and look at those first sort of three policies or that piece of the policy stack as a way to get started, that's been really effective at the state level in guidance, or with Ohio releasing their guidance yesterday, 7 states now have released guidance. And so them starting again with that sort of what already exists. And there's a state overlay here that's really important. There are some states like California who have much more rigorous, what I like to call this very sexy term, are you ready? Super sexy, regulatory undergirding. And that is, and that is policy that already exists, the undergirding. And those policies in places like California or New York are much more rigorous for things like privacy, or actually in New York, there's a law that prohibits you from using data in ed tech tools to improve the ed tech tool. So you actually might not even be able to use generative intelligence tools in education in New York. That's a question right now in that state and one we're helping them work through. But also, so I would start with safety. The last thing I'll say is, here's the advice I give every policymaker, whether it's the head of the AI caucus at the federal level or whether it's a superintendent. You need to move quickly, but do not hurry. And I say that because when you hurry, you will go too fast and not bring enough people along with you, with shared language, with your families, with your educators. And so as you're thinking about the work that you're doing in what a good AI policy looks like, it's not just what the policy says, it's how do people understand it. So I'm gonna give you one more example. Every generative consumer large language model, Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever it is, prohibits the use of that tool by young people under the age of 13. That's their acceptable use policy. And so if you break that acceptable use policy, you are likely breaking your own cyber insurance coverage in your own district. And so be really clear with educators about what the guardrails are that exist in the products. If they're 13 to 18, they likely need affirmative parental consent. So be super clear what's in bounds and out of bounds, and move quickly, but do not hurry.
So I'll answer your question directly and tell you that what's in my policy for my school system, and you can go on the journey of clicking through 1,000 web pages to actually get a copy of this by going to staffordschools.net, going to our school board section and clicking on policies. It's policy 3114, and it is use of generative artificial intelligence. And it's not necessarily the policy that has the power, but it is the corresponding regulation that comes with it. Our policies are typically adopted to be reviewed every 5 years on a pretty cyclical approach from our board. This one was adopted with the intention of being reviewed every 6 months. So my compliments to my school board for seeing that they know that they are going to have to change this. So I'm just going to read a couple of lines out of my policy. And it's really just a 2-paragraph statement articulating how we see generative AI and how it could be used to improve learning outcomes, personalize instruction, and provide access to a broad range of educational resources. Okay? And it empowers the superintendent or designee to guide the appropriate use of AI to augment, not replace, in-person teacher-led instruction. That's it. It's pretty simple. Now, on my corresponding regulation, our purpose is to provide resources and support, but most importantly, it is to clarify definitions. And this is the part that we know is going to change. But our goal really was to put something down on paper and to actually just have something written down that we could refer to, that we could modify, that we could adjust, that we could speak to, and that we could start crafting support and resources around. But we had to start there. And so I'm not gonna pretend that I'm even an expert in AI, but I can tell you that we knew we needed to start, and that we needed to start with the things that we were solid on, and that we could get consensus around, because policy is a political process. And knowing that it's a political process, you're maybe not moving at the speed that you want to move, but you're moving at the speed that the system will allow. And we knew that something had to be articulated and promulgated to our community.
So my real role here is to think like a legislator, and I think that's helpful for you because, yes, you want to create policy at the local level to protect your students, but I think you're also probably interested in avoiding legislative oversight and scrutiny. And so one of the things that I really took from our report is one of the guardrails that I think could help advise maybe this isn't a policy, but it's more protocol and process. It's this concept of ensuring safety, and I think what they really meant by that was, when you implement these tools into the field, make sure that you are being very intentional with how you're rolling them out and testing them. So test. It's one thing to have the policy, but it's another thing to actually make sure that what you are putting into students' hands or in the educational setting actually works. And I think being really cautious about how you do that and having a very defined rollout process of, maybe we're starting in this one particular school, or maybe it's just a classroom, maybe it's just an assignment, and then slowly scaling that up. That's something that I think legislators are really interested in. And so when they ask questions, and they will, and we'll talk about this, they are going to want to know what you are doing. Not only to say, well, I have this policy in place, that's one thing, but actually to explain how you're actually using a process to make sure that those tools are benefiting your students is really something I think is a best practice, and is something that is at least going to put you on good faith terms with legislators if they have any questions about how these particular tools are being used in districts across their state.
I'm going to give a different viewpoint than some of what you've heard here. Be very cautious about making policies around technology. I am always skeptical about making policies around technology. This comes from working for years for the U.S. Department of Education and dealing with what were well-intended policies around technology. How many of you have an API policy? Using APIs all the time, you have data around. You have an API policy, right? I think in the vast majority of the cases, and here's an example of this. If I were to show you a bunch of websites and say which one of them is generative AI and which one is just a really good branching algorithm, you probably couldn't tell me the difference. So is that going under AI policy, or is that going under make policies around principles, not around technology? And so if the principle is use technology in ways that help support learning, great. I don't care whether it's driven by AI or a good algorithm, it doesn't matter. Is it supporting learning? Make a good policy around your acceptable use agreement. Make a good policy around that. A lot of the acceptable use agreements that we see are terrible. They're written as if the goal was to sue a third grader, right? I was in a school, when I visit schools, this is how geeky I am. When I'm in a school, I ask to see your acceptable use guides, and it's like, you will be violated if you share that. And I'm like, they're giving me kindergartners. The kids are like, what does it mean the school's gonna violate me, right? Like, no, that is not language we want to use, right? We want to have plain English policies that say, how should you be using or not using technology? That policies around principles, not around technology. That would be my recommendation.
And I would step away, because what we're hearing as I talk to superintendents across the nation, I am seeing the two approaches. For superintendents who have been on the front end of getting these policies, like Thomas's district, we are seeing something a little bit more specific to AI, but as he outlined, it's an evolving, iterative process. What we are seeing for the superintendents who are coming in a little bit closer is something echoing what both Richard and Erin have talked about around best use, best practice, allowable use. Because it gives you some flexibility as the technology changes, but also just allows you to say, this is a disruptive technology, but we already know what to do. And so we're going to be navigating both of those as we think about the myriad of resources, because we will have districts that take both approaches and both can work. So, other questions from the audience here? I have mine, but this is really...
I know people in this group, there is no way you don't have more questions. I'm just going to say that, but okay.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
So as we venture into this generative AI world with our students, what would you tell us to the modalities to stay away from, and what is a few modalities that might be a good entrance for us? Like, do we start paying for ChatGPT-4? Do we pay for Gemini? Or do we just want to stay with the free version? What would be your initial guidance on that?
So, here's the thing I think you should do. First is build AI literacy, not go to a tool. Because if we don't do that, again, the gaps that already exist will be exacerbated. And so don't create a prompt engineering class district-wide without at least helping people understand what is AI. Because it's actually not just generative AI, it's synthesis AI. And that is the things legislators are actually super concerned about, what brings data together and creates predictive models. It's surveillance AI. How do you then take that data and begin to predict people's behavior patterns or what might likely happen or who's likely at risk. And so building AI literacy should be the core work that we do. And actually that's the core work of education. And so just want to name on April 19th this year, along with partners from across the ecosystem, including the entire steering committee of EdSafe and this administration, we will host National AI Literacy Day with materials for K through 12, out of school time, in school time, professional development, curriculum, that will hopefully help you have some materials to answer the question, what is AI? Not what skills or what chatbot or what competencies and dispositions, but what is AI? Because that's a question we're not answering right now, and that is a huge problem.
So really quick, by the way, +1 to that, 100%, that's exactly the answer I would give. And I would just add to, if you're interested, if you go to isti.org/AI, we have a free curriculum and a number of resources available there to do that. And there's many others, not just, but I just want to throw that out there, isti.org/AI, and it's specifically focused on what the work was that Erin was talking about.
Erin, can you give again the
Yeah.
date and the...
It's AILiteracyDay.org. You can sign up there right now and get updates about when it's happening and what's happening. And really excited because there will be resources from ISTE and NEA and Common Sense Media all curated on that day.
But say, what problem are you trying to solve? We are in this hype cycle. So everybody's flocking to this, what we call it the hammer, Sequoia Capital, they're the famous venture capitalists that we're past the first stage, that's called like the technology's out. They're nuts. Sequoia, they invested in Apple in 1977, so they're kind of prominent venture capitalists out there. He said, now we're in phase 2. Phase 2 is what they call the use case. What others ChatGPT or Gemini. But they also need to realize that themselves are evolving, so it's not ever a constant, it is continuously changing. I think that's going to be a part of the new normal.
Okay, so I want to go to just a rapid fire question. What would you list as the district's must know or do as it relates to AI policy if they had to go back and start with something on Tuesday? Start with you, Richard.
Oh, God.
One size fits all.
This is why I always sit in the middle of the table, just so we're clear.
I mean, I actually think I already said mine, so I'll be very quick. It's rapid fire. I would go back and look at your acceptable use guide right away. Right away. And if it's helpful, you called out, keep it just sitting right there, where'd you go? We put out a guide with COSIN, which is a guide to creating better acceptable use guides. Go look at that. And it gives some examples of how to create that. The tone that you set with your acceptable use guide makes a huge difference for what you do in your school. So that would be my first step.
Talk to your legislator, but specifically talk to them about why you're using these specific tools for specific academic goals. Yes, there's going to be legislators going to be concerned about potential harms of AI, but these are goal-oriented people. They want to make sure that the education system is performing well, and to the extent that you can help articulate how these tools can move towards those goals, that's going to bring them into the conversation in a way that they can learn and also potentially have a benefit for the academic goals that they have for their state and the goals that you have for your districts.
So as the boots on the ground, I will tell you, not nothing.
Yes.
Whatever you do, not nothing.
Something.
Whether it's starting a conversation with your teammates, whether it's starting a conversation with your board, whether it's just beginning to read articles or developing your own personal literacy or having conversations with primarily secondary teachers that are dealing with this on a regular basis, who desperately and are thirsty to know yes or no. Can I, can't I? What are my parameters? Have a conversation, start something. Just get moving.
I'd like you to do 2 things. I'd like you first to email Noelle if you want to join this cohort, because
They are.
you better be, because here's the thing, that we can meet this moment, we can lead, but we have to do it together. And we have to do it in an uncommon alliance. That's one. I'm gonna give you a second piece of homework because I taught middle school and we never give one piece of homework. So sign up for AI Literacy Day. Like, you don't have to make a technology investment or pick a tool or write a policy. You can just do what you do, which is teach people what's happening in the world. And right now, AI is what's happening in so many conversations. Let's educate our young people, our families, our teens about what is AI. So sign up at AILiteracyDay.org.
One thing I think I also want to add in that is maybe not spoken of as responsible use. AI is also not like a calculator. It is very different, and maybe that's also not just intended for the adults, but over time for the learners. They will be your future developers and all that, so the ethical, responsible use. What I've noticed across the country, the world, is that's really an underpinning element where the policy and all those, we'll call it principles, are important. So those are also very important to teach folks. The one thing I remember the first line I read in the software, humans will not create AI to harm other humans. You kind of laugh at it, but then you go, okay. There's something obviously there that they're thinking much more broadly than even some of the actual compliance uses as well.
Any questions? Okay, this one's a little bit bigger, not a speed round. So we don't hear as much as we probably need to about professional development. So going back to this human element, right? And putting my student data privacy hat on, like Indiana Advance and I talk all the time about how the biggest, like data security, data breaches overwhelmingly are human. And honestly, when we look at the data and disaggregate it, more of them tend to be vendor driven than by your staff, but this is a human planning issue. 99% of them are not vindictive, not malicious, but it still happens and the compromise is there. So with that like context and this need for professional development, and the fact that this is probably one of the biggest liabilities, what are the non-negotiables as it relates to PD for educators?
Can I start?
Yes, please?
Yeah.
Not nothing.
Not nothing.
There's a theme.
There's definitely a theme there. So think about this from a business context. When there's a product that gets launched, it goes through an early adoption phase, then a growth phase, then maturity, and then eventually decline. Think of one thing that has trumped all of that we're aware of today. The internet. It's never hit maturity to decline. It is continuously still growing. Social media at some point may hit a period of decline. It's starting to. So as disruptive as social media was and is, and as disruptive as the internet is, and I'm not casting judgment here, I'm just stating it as a thing, AI is in the same space as the internet, not social media. So think about it from that perspective in terms of crafting non-negotiables. It is not an option not to use the internet in your setting. Every single person in this room will not navigate very far in this world past the next 2 hours without the internet. AI is right there. So as a consequence of that, we have to think about what that looks like in our professional learning space as a requisite for all actions moving forward, not as a one more thing. And if you're a retired superintendent and you're like, thank God I got out of the game before this happened, you know, please be mindful that the rest of us that are in this, you know, we can use your help a little bit too, because the reality is that this is going to govern a lot of what happens in the future, not be just an add-on.
Yeah, what he said.
I would just say create safe spaces for folks to experiment with the tools. That part of learning is doing and touching and feeling like you have a place to touch the technology, understand what the technology is. Like, I love when I, with legislatures, you will love this, what I did with them, I hope. Maybe you won't, don't judge me. But I asked them to Google image doctor, right? And then I asked them to think about the people they see as doctors. And folks were amazed that the vast majority of Google images were white men in lab coats. And I was amazed that they were amazed that that was it. Because if you put in things into the Google search bar right now, you're using AI. If you are Google imaging, you are using AI. If you're using Google Maps, you are using AI. If you are banking, you are using AI. If you are doing your taxes, which I hope you do on time this year, you are using AI. And so how you get people to knowledge, not fear, is to give them space to touch, experiment, and play safely with these tools. So build knowledge, not fear.
So picking up on a point that was in part one of our conversation, and I echoed it earlier, technology hasn't reduced your workload. And I love this point because in the context of schools, you're so far past reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? You are educating the total child beyond the test score. Great. AI is going to exacerbate that workload. You're not going to have to stop doing Medicaid eligible services. You're not going to stop IEPs and 504s. You're not going to stop after school. You're not going to stop mental health supports. You're not going to stop feeding the students. And AI might provide some efficiencies and might help us improve operations in teaching and learning, but specific to teachers, you are layering on more. So completely aligning with what Erin is saying, giving them the space and the time to explore and learn and integrate is going to be critical to everyone's success. And then that spills over into the governance part too.
100%, I think experimentation is the best way. It's a way to really double click and go deeper into it and ask those questions. And so what the other non-negotiable thing is, when you talk to ed techs or the technology companies, don't just say, oh, the AI does that. Like, open that black box, ask them how it is working. So I think that's also important to understand how it works, so that also applies and can be very beneficial to how you would be using that or how your educators would be using that. So that's one of those things.
And with that, I would like the record to reflect that you have 6 people from the DC area with 3 microphones, and we finished with 3 minutes. Okay. Please join me in thanking the panelists. I think it's been